back. Welcome back to your favorite animation podcast, well, animation dissecting podcast, Animation Dissection, brought to you by Pimento U. You've tried DeVry, now try PU. I am your host, Nixie, of course here with co-host Zorak.
Old PU, yay, boom.
So, hey, it's been a while. Sorry about that. Things have been pretty hectic lately, but we'll get right back into the business. So today we will be talking about the Dover Boys. But before that, let's do a quick run of the news. Don't have too much this time. Despite having been away for a while, only a couple things have happened. First thing I want to talk about is the Steven Universe is back on the air pretty much almost every day this month. It's kind of another one of those weird scheduling things that Cartoon Network is doing. But beyond that, which I'm really happy about, San Diego Comic-Con happened recently, and during a panel about Steven Universe, the creator of the show, Rebecca Sugar, came out as being bisexual. So I thought it would be kind of cool to talk about this, at least for a little bit, because I think that's a really cool thing in terms of being able to have visibility. I mean, first of all, she is the first female creator at Cartoon Network in general, and is possibly, you know, one of the most visible animation figures at her level to be open about, you know, her sexuality. And not just that, but bisexuality, which is, you know, one of the aspects of LGBTQ that is still fairly misunderstood. So I thought that was something really interesting, and her ability to be open about that was really cool.
Yeah, agreed. You know, it's a shame that this is such a big deal to a certain degree. You know, it'd be great if this wasn't, you know, such a big, like, wow, someone has a sexual identity. So what? But at the same time, you know, it's good to have representation going on. You know, it's good to have a diversity, you know, not only in the casts in, you know, animated works, but also in the production side of things.
Yeah, I think it helps give a sense of normalization. I mean, it helps lead to that time where this type of thing doesn't become a big deal, where it is just accepted as, oh, okay. You know, so in general, I just think it's a really positive thing. And also the show itself does a lot in terms of showing relationships in a different light. And it helps normalizing things in a lot of ways. So overall, I think it was a really positive move. And I think it was actually handled pretty well. I didn't see any real blowback for it. I haven't heard anything about, you know, Ghostbusters level threats or anything like that. So it was kind of a nice positive thing. So I wanted to.
I mean, to a certain degree, I'm sure, you know, I hate to say it, it's a sort of a thing, but a sense of like, with Steven Universe being itself a very, I wouldn't say necessarily sex positive, but a show that's very open towards, you know, diversity in the types of relationships that are shown. You know, I don't think it's necessarily, the Steven Universe audience is aligned with that to a certain degree. And if there was going to be any moral panic about, oh, this person creating animation is gay or is, you know, LGBTQ, and it's like, we probably would have had that panic before about the show itself, you know.
Yeah.
Which I don't think has really come to pass. I think it's just more the sense of that certain audiences don't watch the show due to their own views, and that's how things go.
Yeah, so I guess if they were already assuming it was somehow pushing the gay agenda, you know, they already wouldn't be watching it to begin with.
Sure,
so,
and you know, and I'm sure that kind of view would have been already cemented in their minds.
Yeah. So either way, thought it was a cool thing. So kudos to being able to be open about that. So, and the only other piece of news I have is that Jon Stewart is making a return to television, this time HBO, and it is going to be a animated series that debuts sometime, I think, in the autumn. It's going to be, I don't really know what form it's going to be, other than that, like, he wants the production schedule to be like, I guess, South Park level in that it takes like very little time to produce it, because he wants to be able to comment on current news cycles without like the usual production delay of something like 7 to 9 months per episode. I really don't see the point of it. I mean, I think, you know, why does it have to be an animation versus just, well, I guess he doesn't want to have to be, you know, be accused of just remaking The Daily Show on another network or something. But I don't know.
I mean, It feels to a certain degree the entire reason why he left The Daily Show was to get away from having to do regular updates on everything and having that constant, The Daily Show was a daily show, for like a decade, essentially, like I presume part of it is he just wants to have a bit of an easier job, or at least a less demanding time-wise job. To which end, I'd say, why isn't he doing something just more of an infrequent, weekly type program?
Almost like something that one of his proteges would make. Something that is weekly and in depth. What could it possibly be on HBO, no less?
Yeah.
Oh, it's hurting my brain. I just can't think of it. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like the medium of animation itself is being used kind of like a novelty in and of itself, and I just go like, just do your show. I mean, if you're wanting something less stressful, animation is not the medium for you.
It's not stressful for him because he can't animate it, so he's not responsible for it. So he's literally just says, yeah, do this. I'm gonna go lay on my couch. See you guys in like 3 weeks, or whatever. It's not that demanding on him. I think the production in general is probably more demanding, to a certain degree than probably The Daily Show was. Except for, I don't know, Daily Show would probably used a heck of a lot of writers, I would presume.
Yeah, they have a full writer's room. But here's the thing is that with animation, you can't constantly make revisions to the script and the performance. You have to solidify that and then do the production. So his previous experience working in relatively, daily and live television, essentially, and yes, they were recorded a few hours before, but they would do updates to the script depending on how the audience reacted to it and things like that. That's a big jump from that to animation. So I have no idea what that's going to be like. And also Jon Stewart's history with other things of The Daily Show is hit or miss. So we'll see. And the only other piece of news I got is that BoJack Horseman season 3 is out on Netflix. So it's a series that I definitely am into myself. We'll definitely have to talk about it later, but that's the current newest release. So check that out if you do have a Netflix account.
Yeah. I would say as part of the periodic anime update, I would say we are in the summer season. Not a lot that I'm particularly excited about. I would just say that the only major one that I think is quite good is Mob Psycho 100.
Yeah, just was about to say that one is incredible.
I think it's interesting looking back at that compared to One Punch Man, given that they're both originally webcomics, or actually one is a webcomic, and I think they're actually both webcomics.
They were both webcomics, and then the other one got a different artist to kind of remake it. So
I find it interesting looking back at the two in the sense that I like One Punch Man as a manga better than Mob Psycho by a lot, but I think this as an anime is much better than One Punch Man's anime because it feels like it elevates the material, whereas the One Punch Man anime felt like it was just doing the material a service, not necessarily a good service or a disservice. It was doing it a service. Like, it was not bad. It was just middling to effective. Mm-hmm. Like, it was faithful to a certain degree, but it didn't elevate the material.
Well. Here's the thing: is that with One Punch Man, it has to fight against Yusuke Murata's artwork.
Sure.
I mean, that in itself is an uphill battle, and when you're doing an adaptation of something that is already so set at a certain level, it kind of sets up a barrier. It means like you really can't experiment as much with this one because the original art style is relatively crude and very freewheeling. It allows, in terms of the visual animation, like you can do a lot more with it because like it is far more simple, and just stylistically, I think it kind of lends itself to being adapted in a much more visually auteuristic way, as in the people who are doing the adaptation have a very specific point of view and how they want to pull this off. I mean, it feels a lot like how Ping Pong the animation was.
Sure.
in a certain degree. I mean, I think it has a lot. I think there actually are a lot of parallels in that they're using. It's a mixture of different mediums in it as well. So like you have this person who is doing either layers of it or sections of it with a painting on glass as the animation technique. So there's a lot of really neat things going on with that. I don't have my notes with me on who the person directing it is, but they have like a wide amount of experience and is kind of a well-respected figure in the animation community in Japan. So a lot of people, when they saw that, not only is Mob Psycho kind of like a well-liked series, but the person who's working on it was able to bring in a lot of people who are like, oh, I really want to be a part of this. Kind of like how Space Dandy was in that regard. So that one is really exciting. I'm a big fan of Food Wars, just because I think it's pretty well done. I mean, it's ridiculous and it has like weird elements to it, but I think it's self-aware about that. And then the only other one I could think of is this weird series called RE0, like Starting Life in Another World, where it's kind of like anime Dark Souls. I don't know how to really explain it. Like it's a little bit Edge of Tomorrow mixed with like a Dark Souls thing. It's extremely brutal. It has someone who has to restart over and over and over again, and being psychologically like actually affected by the fact that like they are dying and restarting over and over again. It's a lot better than what you think it's going to be. So that one kind of took me by surprise. But yeah, Mob Psycho 100 I think is like the most exciting new series that is currently running right now.
Yeah. Well, one other thing with Mob Psycho 100 that I would say is that I find also compared to the One Punch Man anime that the anime original material that they've been actually inserting into it has actually been much better than the One Punch Man anime did, in the sense that they have a lot more, like if you actually read the original comic and then side by side it with what happens in the anime, the actual way that things are paced, the actual way that they actually build up and handle the emotional timing in the Mob Psycho 100 anime is very, very good, and it is in fact I find much better comedically timed in general than the comic itself. Whereas with the adaptation of the Murata One Punch Man manga into anime form, they ended up adding certain little bits of padding here and there, and the quality of that is not great. In fact, there's some anime original material in there that is actually that I really actually disliked, which is unfortunate, but it's not like it makes One Punch Man a bad anime. It just means Mob Psycho is a much better anime. So it goes. One anime I'd potentially recommend, also potentially, I think this is actually technically a anime from last season, and I've managed just to catch little bits of it here and there, is Tonkatsu DJ.
I have not heard about this one.
I think it's from last season. I might be wrong. I've only been catching it through other people watching and then catching bits of it and being like, yeah, all right, this is pretty good. It's the entire premise is this kid family owns a tonkatsu, like Japanese style, like shop for food, but he wants to be a DJ. And every episode is like, how does this thing about tonkatsu apply to DJing? It's really dumb. But the actual comedic timing in it is really good, and it is genuinely just like, effective as a dumb like parody thing. It's got some nice, kind of like good comedy to it, which, as much as there are a lot of comedic anime, it's also kind of Japanese comedy is actually generally speaking, I wouldn't say generally speaking, kind of bad to Western sensibilities. A lot of it is just very just like the pun or this is a goofy thing. Blah. There's a lot of
it indicates too much.
Sure, and a lot of it's really on the nose because it being on the nose is part of the gag. And with this one, there's a lot of things in here that just kind of feel like a Western style comedic, sort of thing where they're just like a lot of repeatedly going back to having the subtitle "Stay fresh" in English, or like "Stay cool" float onto the screen when trying to like talking about like, yeah, you got to cool down your audience with your DJing, just like with tonkatsu. And there's having that slowly move onto screen, it feels almost like a, kind of like a Harvey Birdman type joke, just like not quite that level of quality of, good writing, and it certainly is a lot more on the nose than, like a Harvey Birdman, but there's just certain stuff in there where it's like paste that you're like, yeah, someone on here, they get it. They get it. They got some ideas.
So is this a regular length one, or is it one of those ones that each episode is like 5 minutes or things like that? Or
it's like a 5-minute thing. I think it's actually technically like an O. It might be an O&A. I don't know. I don't even know what the full name thing is. It's like Tonkatsu DJ something.
Okay.
I don't know.
Do you know where people can find episodes of it?
Nope.
Okay, well, go to Google, type in Tonkatsu DJ, which is spelled BUBBBH, and see what comes up. I think that'll be very fruitful for everybody who tries to find this show that you recommend.
I guarantee that if you search Tonkatsu DJ, you'll find it, assuming you know how to spell Tonkatsu, which, given our audience, I don't know if that's a given or not. I don't know.
Make sure safe search is on.
Yeah. One other anime thing is that not related to the current season, but hey, this just came out on film. They recently put out a compilation mini film thing of a number of direct-to-internet Gundam, like OVA, like shorts. And it's actually really good, even if you aren't particularly necessarily interested in Gundam. It is a sort of a really short 1 hour thing of like, man, war is bad. Like really bad, and then doing it in space. That's definitely
very Gundam.
No, but it's like, and then space, doing it in space does not help at all. Also, it's got a sick ass jazz soundtrack by, I believe, like Yoko Kanno's like jazz band from like the bebop days. I think it's like them that's doing it. So not with Yoko Kanno being involved, but just like that band is basically here.
That overall sound, essentially.
Yes. And it's the funny thing is that there's one of the things that people are criticizing it for is like, man, it's got like this jazz when like horrible things are happening. It's like, there's like really discordant how like you have this freewheeling chaotic jazz and the horrors of war. And it's like, you fucking morons. That's perfect. That's the point. You got the discordance.
It's almost as if
great.
It's intentional. Almost like directors and artists have some sort of agency in their choices and using things like juxtaposition to create in new meaning for the audience to interpret. I mean, you know.
Yep, but it's called Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky. I believe you can find it both in its original portions on YouTube. I think they might have the film version on YouTube. They've gotten really big about that, where they'll just like, look, we know what our actual means of making money here is on this stuff. People will buy the Blu-rays because they care, and then they'll buy model kits. That is our pricing scheme. So we're going to go ahead and subtitle this in English ourselves, we being the guys in Japan making this, and then we'll just put it on YouTube so that you can see it. Buy our model kits. Come on, just do it. Because that's how they make their money.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of these shows are advertisements for the original, you know, many of these adaptations of manga are just essentially advertisements to go read the goddamn manga. So,
sure.
You know,
yeah, and this is less a
sense.
manga. This is less a manga advertisement as much as it's the fact that the Gundam engine, even when it's built on, glorifying war is terrible and you're a bad person. Also, you should buy our model kits of these war machines. They're super cool. Like,
have their cake and eat it too.
They're the people directing it, generally speaking, are aware of the conflict there, and they often like go to that as a point of like
contention.
A focus.
Yeah.
One of the classics of that is there's a Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket, which is literally about like kids on a space colony, like unaffected by the war, and be like, yeah, these robots are cool. I wish I could see them. Oh, my family died.
Yeah, they suddenly find out that being a war otaku is not as glamorous as they were hoping.
I mean, it literally ends with these kids who not realizing this one kid got really affected by it. Saying, "Don't worry, I'm sure there'll be another war sometime soon." As he's crying, knowing that his friend died, and they don't know this. And it's like this like cheerful leaving as like during this school like speech thing, his kids crying, pulling away, and it's like in this really well animated thing. It's from like the 1980s. It's great. Great OVA. This new one is also a great little. It feels like a compacted like view of realistic war-ish type thing. We're going to go into just how terrible war is, and we're going to compact it into an hour. We're going to sell you on everything that the message of Gundam is in 50 minutes. Go. And it works pretty well. I actually recommend it. I might want us to later on to maybe look at talking about it on the show. We'll see.
Okay, well, what is the name of that again?
Gundam Thunderbolt, December Sky.
Cool. So definitely look that up then. So let's get on to today's topic, which is kind of an unusual one for us because this is a very, very a short. It's an actual short. The Dover Boys, which was released in 1942, Warner Brothers Animation, directed by Chuck Jones, with a runtime of I think exactly 9 minutes. So this parodied the Rover Boys, which was a book series from the early 20th century. Not a very well hidden parody. It's pretty explicit about that. But the thing about the Rover Boys is that it was kind of the foundation of things that we would see later. So like the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew or various other adventure serials that are kind of in a similar vein. So that's kind of where this is coming from. Some funny background things about it, where the studio itself was not very happy with the cartoon, even though I think Chuck Jones said it was probably one of the first ones he did that he really liked and thought was funny. And because they were so unhappy with it, they were going to try to fire Chuck Jones, but because they weren't able to find anybody who was as good as doing what he did, he got to stay in his position and continue making cartoons.
And it's especially funny given how many techniques this single bit of animation really kind of like introduced to the industry. Just like so many things. Like I don't know if this is actually the first. I think.
I mean, it's one of the earliest of the films to make as much use of it. I mean, like the thing is
smearing
like,
in particular is what
yeah, I mean, and also this was during a time period where Warner Brothers itself was trying to cut costs, so they were going towards more limited animation, and smears are really useful when you are dealing with a limited frame count. But with this one in particular, people during its initial release thought, let's cut down on the smears, guys. I think that was a little bit excessive. But I think this was one of the times where like, okay, we're just going to burst onto the scene, use it as much as possible to figure out where it works and where it doesn't. And then over time, it was kind of integrated a bit more subtly. Because here it's very apparent that the smears are being used. Usually you want to kind of hide the smears to some extent so they're not so noticeable.
Although, to a certain degree, their use of smears is
it
both
adds a
innovative.
charm.
Well, I mean more in the sense like it's both innovative in the fact that like, hey, they use smears, but it's also innovative in the sense of like, hey, they use smears to comic effect because the smears themselves are very, very funny. And there are that becomes like a very recent thing in the sense of like that happens a lot where it's like, hey, we can have characters move in goofy, weird ways. And that in it itself is appealing. Like that's kind of like to make a very, modern example in the sense of like of foreign animation, like Studio Trigger does smears all the frickin' time on everything they do. Like it's like they have whole characters that essentially exist as a long, widespread smear in works that they make.
Oh yeah,
because
even the original Sailor Moon series would have things like smears in them.
I'm just saying, like, but that's like just like everything is smeared for certain characters, This character is a living smear because that gives a this sense of energy and just like constant, just fluid, just like, oh God, just like ever constant movement, and the way that translates into the animation and the art style just looks really cool. And particularly we see that a lot in Dover Boys with like, everything involving Dan Backslide.
Yeah. Well, let's go real quick into what a smear is and how they work, because I'll go to a little bit of insight on why they need to happen in certain ways when you're doing both limited animation and even regular animation. So, how does animation work on a fundamental level is down to a concept called persistence of vision. So, what that is it's how we're able to see a whole bunch of frames flashback in front of our eyes, and then our brain is able to reassemble that into perceptible movement. So what happens is when you see the image, it's kind of held in place until it's replaced by the second frame. And when you have that object moved from one location to another between the two frames, our brain fills in the gap going, oh, okay, it moved from one to the other. The thing is that is limited by the speed of the object. So if you have an object moving too fast, it will instead look like two separate objects rather than being the same object that's moved from one distance to the other. If you are ever in a physics class and you had that exercise where you're spinning a bike wheel and then have a strobe light, and you can create the illusion of the bike wheel spinning backwards by changing the frequency in which you shine the light versus the speed in which the wheel is rotating, it's kind of like that effect. So where smears come in is it allows you to do a long distance of movement in a very short amount of frames and still look like it's the same object rather than two objects being flashed in front of you. So what happens is, let's say you have a ball on the left side of the screen, and then in frame 3, it's on the right side of the screen. That's not very much time in order to get that ball to move from one side to the other. You will only have one other frame to show the movement. So what they'll do is, much like a motion blur, they'll have just enough intersecting where the ball existed on the first frame and on the third frame, so that way it kind of connects them. It allows the brain to kind of go, okay, I see where the path is going here, and it just it fills it in. So smears act a lot like motion blurs, but with more solidity and much more selectiveness about what you are going to be exaggerating.
And the interesting thing I find always with smears is the fact that the actor intervening, in between frames are often, they're not actually always the perfect representation of what that object would actually be doing between, the actual motion itself. That's the ideal. But the thing is that with, especially with, cartoons, which are comedic works, you're not beholden to the fact that, a ball, if you were to actually smear it between frames, because smearing is a general visual technique that occurs with like film and everything. If you do it right, you can reduce, the acquisition rate and get a natural smear. With animation, often you can play around with the smear and do things that are intrinsically just very stylistic or very funny just by how they're depicted. You can put, make behavior in the intervening frames either too fast, like the smear is super quick such that like the motion seems instantaneous, but the smear exists just to give this semblance of motion. And that can result in really interesting animation things. And also you can just kind of break models and break, the forms and break the shapes and just do absolutely just bizarre things. And with cartoons, you can just create just motions that just are just stylistically very interesting. You don't have to draw all possible. You don't have to make everything like have a very realistic structure in terms of how they move. You can go very, hog wild. And that's the interesting thing is that this is at its heart a cost saving measure because you're not having to animate as many frames. But at the same time, has a whole, massive amount of potential creative options and, ways that opens up, stylistically for you to actually approach the animation.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it allows you to be expressionistic without having to be bogged down by making everything technical. And by having the boundaries of limited animation, they were able to kind of find interesting and creative solutions within it. And that's where smears are, of course, different than just a motion blur. Otherwise, we'd refer to them essentially as the same thing. So it does allow people to accentuate certain parts of the character or the form or the motion that a pure regular motion blur would just kind of make more generalized. You can make it more specific in its movements rather than just mechanical. So that's the advantage of smears. You'll see them even in stuff that isn't limited animation. You'll see in like Aladdin, for example. You'll see these kind of strange in-betweens that exist because it's like, well, we got to get this from one place to the other in a really quick time. We're not doing blurs because that's not the style we're working in, so it has to be a smear. And the thing is, I think a lot of this technique was not made in mind of, the technology to be able to pause, and play and step-by-step frame for the average audience person. Like the audience member now on YouTube or at home can sit there and hit pause and skip frame by frame and notice this type of stuff. Originally, these are just being shown in theaters. So once it's done, it's there. It doesn't have that repeat viewing culture that there is now. So that the technique, I think, back then was just viewed entirely different than it is now. Although, again, I think smears are totally still useful now. Although I think a lot of people overdo them a little bit. This particular short is often used as a teaching material in animation school. And unfortunately, I don't think smears are often taught very well. And so you'll get people using them in places that don't make sense, or they just don't know how to use it in terms of exposure sheet or frame count. So it ends up looking wrong. Smears are very powerful, but they can look really wrong if you don't do it right. So it's a difficult technique. And I think a lot of people definitely struggle with it. So about the Dover Boys. I really don't know how to explain it other than like its humor style being just this relentless, rapid-fire irreverence and just obtuse jokes just at an incredible pace. And I think the overall kind of tone is this kind of satire of this kind of sanctimonious and moralistic ideal of the genre it's kind of making fun of. So like you have a couple slams at Prohibition, or I think it also means making fun of like runabout cars, which haven't really been popular since like 1914, making fun of how you have to wind those damn things up and the way people used to dress, and the just like the kind of like, oh, these protagonists are really boring and straight and narrow and things like that, which is a really old-fashioned way of forming a protagonist. It's in stark contrast to characters like Bugs Bunny, who's a kind of a wily, smartass kind of protagonist. These were the very, bland kind of characters. And what's really funny is that the Tom, Dick, and Larry are barely the protagonists of their own cartoon. I mean, even the narrator stops short of calling them jerks. I mean, the real breakout star is Dan Blackside or Backslide. Backslide.
Dan Backslide.
Who performed by Mel Blanc, and I think it's one of my favorite performances of him. It is. I mean, it is. He's emotionally all over the place, so you get this great range of attitudes, and it makes just such great use of his voice. It's such a great. I mean, a couple of the gags just require that perfect delivery to work.
So much of it's just he's screaming constantly, and it's great,
but in a good way, not in like a Newgrounds.
No.
I only it's funny because they're loud. No, it works because it's selective. So like one of my absolute favorite gags in the whole thing is like, runabout, I'll steal it. No one will ever know. Like. That itself works.
It's a joke.
That's
the joke
that he's yelling.
Yep.
Yeah. So like that's where it works. Other times, like instead of becoming shrill, it also fits the genre. It fits the style of the story that it's telling. It is supposed to be unsubtle. It is supposed to have these characters yelling out their motivations and their feelings really clearly. It is that kind of hackneyed aspect to it is its intent. Like there's a point to it.
Yes, but the thing I would say is that while it is very much a parody, it's very much a satire, it ultimately transcends the material that it's actually parodying, because I think that this work, I feel if you had found like a child, like this child who had lived, never seen like maybe even like a cultural like implication of like what not even a rover, what
like Hardy Boys or anything.
Hardy Boys, yes,
yeah.
Like you show them this, they would find it freaking funny because so much of the context does not actually need to be there, because so much of it makes sense in and of itself, and the comedic timing of everything in it is just so freaking good. Like it is like a joke every 5 seconds, and those jokes feel like they're like modern ass good jokes. Like there are so many like
they stand the test of time in a lot of ways. But what I'm saying is knowing the background enhances it. So it's not a requirement, but going like, oh, okay, I totally get what they're going for, or what kind of thing they're making fun of, and that adds to it. It's not a requirement.
Sure. I'm just saying that in an abstract sense, like getting the general feel of, boy, yes, things used to be really, stayed back then, or, real stuck up, like that's literally all you need to know to get like the basic concept of like what's going on here.
Yeah. Like all American teens, it's a little bit like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the jokes that they immediately start just pounding in like these great visual gags. Like one of the first very few gags is they introduce the Dover boys one at a time, and they're all riding their own bikes, but like you have Tom riding a 3-person bike on the back with the thing in the air, just pedaling away. You have Dick standing on like this massive like penny farthing, hands on nothing, no legs,
feet on nothing,
feet on like on the seat. The thing just moving forward on its own, and then
Larry is
on tricycle, and he's on the only one that's actually did the thing, but that doesn't make any sense at all. And this is just a dumb joke because then you just get these silhouettes of them moving, and it's just like, yeah, that is fucking perfect. That is also a great visual joke.
And the way they have what's her name? The female character,
Dora Standpipe.
Dora Standpipe. The way they have her move by just not having feet, she just glides because the dress of the style back then just perfectly hits the floor, and it's just she just
also it's perfect. Like that's a perfect like symbolism of like her daintiness and like how that works.
It works with her characterization, and it works again as contrast for later.
Not only does she have no feet, but they have that little bit where she's moving through the house, and she kind of slides around things, like moving. Yeah,
she glides.
There's
great.
There's no leg movement. It's just like she's like on like a dolly being moved around, and it's just like it's a great visual joke, and they don't dwell on it. They don't like go like, guys, check out this joke, like it's just like a Family Guy or something.
It doesn't call attention to itself. That's the thing that I think really works with this is no matter how irreverent, no matter how strange, no matter how rapid fire, it never pauses to sit there and be proud of the gag it just pulled off. It just goes, no, this is just there. Or it's not like, you think this is funny. This isn't even the main gag. It's just in here because we can. It's great.
Yeah, and then you have like these great visual gags, but you also have these really good spoken gags that work just still to this day perfectly. Like
most of Dan Backslide's is just amazing. His lines.
But I even say like early on, like the narration of like when they're introducing Dick, and they mention it's like on a boy of like 18 and 3.5 summers, as mentioned previously in Dover Boys and the Everglades. Like the way that is actually conveyed there, and like the weird detail.
Well, he almost calls them jerks, like which are that's great. The three heroes of our story.
But that little detail of just like the writing in it is phenomenal. Like just overall,
the book that Dan Backslide has to use to pry her off the tree. How to properly like remove a damsel from a tree. I think one of the other ones I really liked was when the trio's in stunned shock, and then it cuts away from them for quite a while, and then they do the whole long chain of communication from one to the next. The Boy Scout doing a pedophore just standing in front of another guy who writes it on a pad, and then goes to a telegram office, and then when the telegram's read out, they're still in the same pose.
Yep,
like that was really great. I mean, that's a little bit of an old school gag, but like when you think about 1942 and doing that type of gag, that is really a prescient gag. Like that type of meta humor about the language of cuts and edits and compressed time in film is kind of advanced for the time period.
And one gag I really liked about that also is when they're first driving by the bar on their bicycles, and they're doing the aversion pose that they do, that comical but they go in front of the bar, and then it immediately stops so that they can move into the bar. They move the camera moves in the bar to show Dan Backslide, but it doesn't hard stop.
They settle.
They settle, and that is so good because that implies that the actual stop is not a camera trick. It's them actually stopping while frozen in place, such that the camera can move in there.
It's literally one extra frame of animation does all of that. It's great.
It does so much for like the feel because it's like this is like meta joke.
Absurdity.
Like,
It's making fun of the language of how film works. Like we normally understand a pause and a zoom, but it's like, no, we're gonna just fuck with that. We are actually gonna make it again. It's a type of meta humor that is really, again, I think pretty advanced for that. Like that is kind of much more of a postmodernism thing, and they already had that back then. I mean, also this is Chuck Jones. I mean, if you wanted a guy that for slapstick and for these types of procedural breaking jokes, like he's the guy for that. I think this was where he was really cutting his teeth into it.
I mean, Jones and Schlesinger are like fucking like amazing at everything they essentially do in terms of like these animated works. Like, they are like, incredible about the type of thing that they produce in general. But like, Dover Boys in itself as such a small, just weird standalone work, there's just so much in there that it's just incredible in a modern context and like an immediately like always revisitable. Like I've never gotten tired of watching the Dover Boys. Like I can go back to it like any time and I still just find enjoyment because the gags don't tire because so much of it is tied to just the great little stylistic details that you just kind of watch and you're just like, oh,
it's universal humor in the best way. Like,
but it's also like, it's kind of like a lot of the humor is also like, man, they made a great decision here.
Yeah. I mean, it's finesse to hell. I mean, it's really, it's just really well done. And I'm actually really glad, I mean, in this case, that they didn't try to make sequels or anything off it. I think it exists so well on its own that trying to serialize it further would actually detract from it. Because like, even that whole gag about like, as previously documented in Dover Boys and the Everglades, like the whole point is that it doesn't exist. Is that you are only seeing this one snapshot in, I guess, what's supposed to be a series in its own mind. Again, there's this strange meta-ness to it that is just, it works really well. I kind of love just a lot of the old-timey stuff in it, too. So you have everybody is wearing the shoes with the Cuban heels. Even like the telegram operator is using it. The runabout joke, just like how awkward those cars were and his outfit when he is like trying to drive it, and I just love all that type of stuff. Like it is also making fun of stuff that was, I guess, for them popular about 30 years ago. It's kind of like us making fun of the 80s now. Mm-hmm. So
and there's like that's all sorts of like weird like stuff like a life that's like the whole Boy Scout joke about like these Boy Scouts conveying like the wonderful visual gag.
It was semaphore, right?
Yep, yeah, but also like the fact like all this Boy Scout sees what's happening here in this cabin, and the Boy Scout's literally in the window looking through into the cabin with binoculars, point blank, then running off to a fucking like running off to a telegram.
No, he runs off, does the semaphore to...
Oh, he does the semaphore to a guy that's standing...
Who's just standing there in front of him. Like, he runs the whole distance. So instead of doing the semaphore over the long distance, he runs that long distance to do the semaphore in front of the other one.
Yep. And then that guy goes and telegrams it, and then...
The telegram guy,
Yep. There's so much there that's just, like, great, just weird language in terms of that.
Her standpipe's super strength.
Yep.
The repetition of what was it? Halt, Dan, backslide.
No, unhander, Dan, backslide. Unhander, Dan, backslide. Unhander, Dan, backslide. Boy, we're getting in a rut here.
That is the only. Okay, that last line is the only time where I felt like it was a misfire.
No,
I'm just saying, boy, I think we're in a rut. Like, I think it would have worked just without commenting on it.
No, I think that's good because it is the only example, and it is
of awareness on the character's part.
But it's also completely pointless because that amount of awareness there doesn't make any sense because they're completely unaware of everything. Like it is not a Bugs Bunny type character, and the fact that the character is remarking to the camera like he is itself really funny to me because it's kind of just like. That character should not be even marginally self-aware. And in fact, the whole thing is completely like the whole scenario is predicated on like the Dover Boys being completely terrible at everything that they do and just being completely unaware and just being like
because
morons.
Of the genre, they're still considered the protagonists.
Sure.
Meaning it's kind of like how they have like, protagonist shield, essentially, so that they're shielded from those consequences to some degree.
Sure, and it doesn't all. So much of it also just doesn't make any sense, in the eternal narrative, because obviously, and that's why it's great. That's why Dan Backslide spends so much time screaming next to right next to the Dover boys, she's alone and unprotected, and then right there. Well, again, rationally speaking, they'd be like, "Oh, well, clearly they would hear," but no, the gag of that is great because they don't call attention to it; it's just there.
Well, here's the thing: is with Dan Backslide. Having him talk to the camera kind of makes sense. His whole thing is soliloquy, but for me, having Tom talk to the camera ends up violating the concept of the character being unself-aware. So that's why, for me, why that gag works for you is exactly why I think that one gag is the only misfire. Is for me that it breaks the idea of the character being unself-aware. Just having him do that repetition and just keep on going on as normal because he doesn't realize how dumb that is, for me would fit the gag of the character more. So but of course that's just my interpretation. Again, this is like the one misfire in the whole thing for me.
You see, I disagree in the sense that it's like how having a super serious show that just or a character that's taken totally serious, just all of a sudden just going at the camera and just shrugging whatever, I don't get it either. That in and of itself is to me a good dumb gag. It's an easy gag. It's kind of you remark to the camera, but it's also funny because that doesn't make any sense coming from that character at all.
Well, see, but for me, Dan Backslide is already the one who was doing those types of gags. Oh, how I love her. Father's money. Who is he? He is talking to the audience already. So that.
No. But the thing with that is that Dan Backslide is not. He's talking to the audience, but he's also does not seem to be aware of the meta-ness of anything going on. Whereas Tom making a meta comment about this is. We're just getting in a rut here. It's kind of that itself is a meta comment that doesn't make any sense. That feels like if this was a filmed work, that'd feel like the actor breaking script and just being right here. It's a dumb comment that just makes, to me, works as a meta thing. Gotcha. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I personally, it works for me, and I find it funny. It's not nearly my favorite thing in there, but I like it.
Well, like I said, I think the reason it works for you is the exact reason it doesn't work for me. It's just my, the way I interpreted it. So, but again, for me, that's just one of the only misfires in it is that for me. The rest of it, I think, is just so well done. And I mean, even the I don't know what to call him, the weird sailor guy that keeps showing up to kind of punctuate and kind of break up some of the madness. Even that is used really well. It comes out of nowhere, but at the same time, it doesn't feel random in a bad way. It knows how to surprise you every time. The way this cartoon works, you don't see where it's going. You can't tell where it's going to go because it doesn't let you. It doesn't let you kind of sit down and go, okay, this is the way these types of stories normally, because it never relents.
Yeah, it breaks convention so much, and then it does it so fast that you don't have a chance to go I bet this is going to happen next, because it's immediately what do you think I was going to do next? Actually, I did something completely different 5 minutes ago. You may have been missing it when you're too busy going, I wonder what's going to happen next. And it doesn't. None of this is like monkey cheese random. It is super precisely constructed to do everything it does, but it's compact. It feels like a compact, artisanally constructed middle finger pointed at the source material that's doing, and also the convention of film, animation, and just how these narratives work. There's just so much in there that just feels like it almost feels like Chuck Jones was kind of, oh, these guys are pushing me here. Screw it, I'm gonna do this thing because whatever, this seems like this would be a dumb thing to do, and he just did whatever he wanted, and just packed it all in. That last ending narrator gag is this is the part where we say good day.
Yes.
it's a random gag that's kind of just where did that come from? But it's kind of it works because the entire work is just so irreverent and so just it's unrelenting.
It's irreverent without being mindless.
Yep.
And I think that is the big thing here. As you say, monkey cheese humor is if I was going to be more intellectual about it, I would call that kind of a forced irreverence. Or a thoughtless irreverence, meaning if I just throw a whole bunch of shit at the wall, something will eventually become funny. This one feels like it was edited. It feels like, okay, no, like it seems entirely random, but it was put together thoughtfully. It just hides that thoughtfulness really well, so you can't try to analyze it under normal circumstances when you're watching it.
Yeah.
At least that's the best way I can kind of summarize it.
Yeah, it's a very intelligently constructed, thing. Like everything about it feels very deliberate in every little.
But without
decision
coming across as being that way. That's the best thing. Is it hides it so well. So I mean, it's just really great. And I'm really glad that it came back into prominence recently. When. I mean, I think the story behind it is that it fell into public domain, but I don't know if that was exactly true. But either way, it suddenly became very popular online again. So it was really nice to see people going like, oh shit, look at this cartoon that a lot of people had overlooked for many years. Unless you were in animation school or a particular fan of Warner Brothers cartoons, I think the general public had not really seen this one as much, just because it was essentially a one-shot one and not, like a classic Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse or something like that. So I'm really glad it came back, essentially, because there's a lot of really great ideas in it, and you can kind of see seeds for more modern humor planted within it. Again, that kind of meta humor to it without necessarily calling attention to the meta humor. A lot of the stuff now is doing meta upon meta, versus this one is like, no, we're doing a satire, but we're going to use the trappings of the medium as jokes in themselves. So it does it very gleefully. It's not snarky, it's gleeful in how it's doing things. And I really appreciate that tone.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's making fun of like the parody. It's like a satire, but it's not a satire with any necessary like bite to a certain degree. It's more just a sense of like it's a satire that is like
Horatian or Juvenalian? Like I always confuse the two. Horatian is one where it's I think Horatian is when it is extremely cutting, like there's an anger and a poison behind it, and I think Juvenalian is if it's a bit more of a gleeful send up, like farce or things like that. I might have them reversed, but I think that's the right order of those.
Yeah, I mean this feels like this to me feels more like in the vein of like this feels like a predecessor to like Airplane. Like, like in the sense of like we took all the, the tropes of this thing, and we are continually going to subvert every single one as it goes, and we're going to have a good time with it. Not necessarily because we hate the source material, but because it's just funny to do that, because you understand what's going to happen, or you can, conceive in your head how things are going to happen, and we're going to continually do goofy things within a reasonable context. And like, and it feels like, the modern parody context of like Airplane, which sadly has gone, completely down into the dumps. There's no good, parodies on that like in film anymore. Unfortunately,
no, not in the same way. I think what it is that it embraces the obtuseness. It embraces the absurdity. It's not sitting there saying, "Oh, we're much smarter than this genre. Look how dumb these things are." It goes like, "No, look how dumb these things are. It is hilarious. How does that reality work? It's great."
Yes,
it's that different tone. It doesn't have the idea of looking down upon it. It has a no. Look at how ridiculous this is. Isn't that amazing?
Yes, it has that element of it, but it also very on the good side also lacks like the dumb, like, goofy dumb jokes that like a lot of modern parodies have, like you're bad.
Well, it doesn't shoehorn in a bunch of, pop culture references. It doesn't shoehorn in, a bunch of celebrity shit. It lets it be what it is.
Yep. Like it is an incredibly intelligent satire of something that probably shouldn't deserve quite as intelligent of a satire, and that's great. Like that's what I love about like the movie like Airplane. Like Airplane to me is essentially a perfect comedy, and it is funny that one of the most perfect, greatest comedy in the world is about a freaking like send up of like airplane films from the 1970s. Like that is a dumb. That in and of itself is a dumb subject matter to have like as like your big great satire, but that in itself is very funny. Like the fact that this is a dumb send up of like, like Hardy Boys type crap from the 1920s is itself a good joke.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, it helps that it's not trying to be current. That in itself makes it stand the test of time in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people get too focused on, can I reflect the now? Can I reflect the now? Without really thinking, well, is this really going to hold up? I mean, I think maybe perhaps because a lot of media these days is designed to be disposable and really only enjoyed in the now and not really looked back upon, the idea of making something that keeps a legacy is not as much of a thing anymore, which I think is kind of a shame. I mean, it keeps like classics from kind of developing. And it's kind of nice to have stuff that is fairly universal, that you don't have to be a person of a certain time period, of a certain educational background, of a certain age to be able to get. You know, as you said earlier, if you showed this to like, you know, a 10-year-old kid now, they would still find it just as funny as a 10-year-old kid would have 20 years ago. That's what I think what makes it such a interesting and worthwhile film to see and to discuss, because it does something that a lot of things are not always able to do, which is to still maintain its humor and its appeal for well over 60, almost 70 years.
Yep.
So, all right. So, Dover Boys. Check that out. It's really easy to find online. I mean, it's on YouTube. Go check it out. 100% worth it. I mean, if you ever have a chance, see if you could find some stills of those smears, because they're really interesting. They're almost like abstract art from the 1960s. It's great.
It's great to just step through like Dan Backslide drinking, you know, like, oh, they drive me to drink, you know.
Yeah.
That just stepping through that smear right there, for example, like, great.
Yeah. Or some of the running when they are, where literally the character is one long streak blob across the screen. It's great.
Yep.
So next time we will be talking about Invader Zim from Nickelodeon. So get prepared for that. You can always reach us by email or Twitter. The email is adthepodcast@gmail.com. My Twitter is @RYMagnuson.
And I'm @SA Zorak.
So, got anything to plug on your end?
Nope.
Perhaps a playthrough you did recently for the first time that you put up on YouTube? You didn't? Oh, okay.
All right. That's just a dumb stream. I don't know. The only thing I would plug is the fact that me and my friend Chirokujo, also known as Red, who is not shown up on the show, but we need to get him on here sometime.
I think we've had him here once or twice.
Did we?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, but one thing we did start doing is a feature on our YouTube channel where we also have the animation dissection on, if you want to watch it out in video form. Not that there's anything added on there, you just watch it on
Well,
YouTube.
it's a higher quality of audio. You can hear our beautiful voices in 256K or 320.
But also we put up a recent video feature where we're trying to learn how to play old trading card games with having little to no understanding of how they work. It's an experience, let's just say. The first one we play is this game called Animayhem. It's a anime card game created by I think it was Aniplex. I don't know. Just weird thing. So if you want to see, you know, me blowing up like an android with like a sex bot, essentially, from some anime or something, or a cop killing 1,000 SWAT officers with a sex bot, it's weird and also real bad. So if you want to see a real bad card game, I guess, for like us playing a bad card game for 2 hours, then stopping, there's that. And then we play the Pokemon card game.
Yep. And that is at YouTube, Zorak Goes On.
Yep.
All right. So we will see you guys next time.